The U.S. wants the war with Russia to end by June. That's according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who also said that both parties have been invited to the U.S. for negotiations next week. Washington and Moscow did not immediately comment, but since resuming office more than a year ago, U.S. President Donald Trump has been advocating for a resolution to the dispute. Russia has persisted in attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure in the meantime, leading to more widespread outages during cold weather. Well, now we are being joined by Morkoc, who is a senior Republican spokesman. He joins me from Detroit to talk about this new, revelation from Zelensky referring to the elections, midterm elections in the U.S. and how he's going to deal with a deadline for the Ukrainian war in June. Good to have you. Now, let's begin this. The U.S. has set a June deadline for Ukraine and Russia to reach a peace deal. What specific measures will the Trump administration take if the deadline isn't met, and how will this impact the pressure on both sides?
Thank you for having me. And I think it's important to recognize that Donald Trump doesn't set deadlines. He publicly always says that you don't want to set a deadline because that just lets your enemy know when to move past you. So Zelensky has come out and said this, but Trump himself hasn't put that as a deadline. That doesn't mean I disagree with President Zelensky or the fact that Trump does want it done in June or that he does want it before the midterms. But certainly putting a timetable on it is sort of the antithesis of what Trump usually does. He tried some timetable stuff early on in the war and it didn't work out for him. So I think in this situation, it's an attempt to bring them both together finally at a high-level negotiation talk, likely in Miami, Florida, where Zelensky has indicated. But Trump, again, is very hesitant to give a date because that just allows our Putin to sort of push back that date. And as you see him striking energy facilities and continuing his behavior, despite the one-week ceasefire, there hasn't been a lot of progress. So I think maybe this is Trump taking a chance here because, if he has this high-level delegation and nothing comes from it, it's egg on his face before the midterms, which is what the implication here is. Of course, they want to complete this before the midterm elections.
Right. Now, quickly, because I want you to be able to answer literally all the questions I have for you. Now, Russia is pushing for Ukraine to withdraw from the Donbas region, but Kyiv has firmly rejected this. How does the U.S. plan to navigate this impasse, and what are the implications for Ukraine's sovereignty?
Very tough situation because the Americans can only do but so much. The Ukrainian constitution doesn't allow them to cede that land. And so in some respects, that's one of the problems that Zelensky is facing. The Americans are going to have to somehow get a special exemption inside of the Ukrainian parliament and or find some concessions to make. Because on the other hand of that equation, Vladimir Putin has spent nearly 1 million lives to take that land, and he's not going to give it up either.
Now, let's talk about the U.S. The U.S. has proposed security guarantees for Ukraine, but what specific measures would these guarantees entail, and how would they be enforced?
I think everything comes down to economic entanglement. If you entangle the U.S. empire with the economic future of Ukraine, specifically the mineral rights deal, which is a 50-50 deal, which normally you would have a 90-10 deal for the people who are doing exploration. It's a charity deal. The idea is to tie American contractors, American multinational corporations, European multinational corporations, everywhere into that situation, so it becomes a de facto American zone without putting it inside of NATO, which would then, of course, trigger articles that could create World War III.
Now, Russia has presented a $12 trillion economic proposal. How does the U.S. plan to counter this, and what are the potential risks and benefits of such a proposal for Ukraine?
Well, it's an interesting situation because Russia is a very wealthy country with a lot to offer. On PPP ratio, it's the 4th richest country in the world. So the Americans need to offer something, obviously, that would be above that, beyond that, but also it's all about market access. And right now, regardless of saying, oh, we're going to open Western markets, we're going to open American markets, the fact of the matter is the Russian market is right there on the border of Ukraine, and they have well-established trade lines. So abrogating that with Western guarantees is going to take a lot of time and runway. So the Russian plan probably is going to be a faster deal for the Ukrainians, but would the Ukrainians ever take a deal with the people who've just invaded them and try to murder them? I don't think so. So I think the Americans have a great chance to supersede that deal, but it's going to cost us 5-10 times more than it would cost the Russians to do so.
Now, Errol, so a ceasefire, right, is being discussed, but How would it be monitored, and what role would the United States play in ensuring its implementation? How does this even benefit the United States?
Yeah, well, that's $1 million question. The ceasefire, of course, benefits the United States if the United States is using Donald Trump's ideology of every life lost is a wasted life. If you're looking at it from a maybe game theory standpoint, perpetuating this war another 3 or 4 years would continue to weaken the Russian economy. So it's a little bit of this interesting situation. The goal here, of course, is peace. And if peace is the goal, then it's not about what's best for the United States in security, because we need Europe to step up. The United States can't be coming in and every time there's a skirmish implementing United States behaviors there. The Russians aren't going to accept that. So Europe needs to get a coalition there, come in there with open source intelligence and today's media. It's very clear when a ceasefire has and hasn't been broken. Right now, the question would be, would the borders hold? And if the borders can hold for 16, 18, 24 months, then you can maybe be confident that there is a legitimate ceasefire. But the Americans aren't going to be able to go in there and forcibly continue that, nor would they want to. It would be against our interest to do so, but much more in the interest of local European powers to step in and fill that gap.
So Ukraine, let's talk about the Ukraine NATO membership issue that has been one of the conversations that Ukraine is putting in the forefront. Ukraine has expressed interest in NATO-like security guarantees. How does the U.S., plan to address this? And would they ignore it? And what are the implications for NATO's expansion?
Well, we are sensitive to their, obvious request. It's a categorical no from us. We promised the Russians back in 1991, if they removed 300,000 soldiers from Eastern Germany, that we wouldn't move NATO 1 inch towards the east. Since then, we've moved as close as possible without being on their border. Having Ukraine and NATO would mean a border skirmish would enact the article that involves everybody. So that would have meant World War III would have already happened. So there is a 0.0% chance that the Americans want or the Europeans want Ukraine and NATO. Now, in terms of Ukraine having NATO backing or being supported by the West, sure. But if they were actually a country in NATO, it would be a disaster for the alliance. It would probably almost make it that the United States should withdraw from the alliance because it would almost guarantee World War III, and therefore there would be no need to participate.
This is the $1 million question I asked, I spoke about from the start of the conversation we're having now. The June deadline, right? It coincides with the U.S. midterm elections. How does the Trump administration plan to balance domestic politics with the need for a sustainable peace deal in Ukraine?
It's going to come down to Trump focusing everybody on energy prices and world peace, bringing about stability. Whether you are in Africa, or you are in South America, or you are in Asia, or you are in North America, the war has affected you through price differential. As well, energy costs. So if you can tie the end of the war to stability, reducing energy costs, and also allow the American people to feel that Trump's push into this international arena has been something that the American domestic MAGA base hasn't really been a big fan of. Yes, we want our president to be out there and doing the right things compared to Joe Biden, how disastrous that was prior. But also many Americans are saying, hey, we're getting all these wins abroad, but where's the win at home? So Trump having to focus back on domestic politics and bringing the negotiations, more importantly, to America, I think is a way for him to tie this all in. If you tie this all in with a big economic deal that also includes Russia, even if it's just tangential, and the markets go, gangbusters at the exact right time, and everybody plays ball, this could be a very big win for the Republicans. But on the other side, if this meeting is a failure right before the midterms, it'll show that Trump wasn't able to deliver on what he promised, and it will really hurt us. So this is a big gamble, but it's something that Donald Trump likes to do, and I'm confident that he'll be successful.
Right then, fingers crossed. Thank you so much, Morkoc, for joining us on The Rise America as a senior Republican spokesman, joined us from Detroit.